Hey, welcome back. I have a little challenge for you today. Try and picture a world in which Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp, Uber, Amazon, and Google don't exist. How would it look like? Weird world to imagine, huh? Impossible? Actually, very real. That world exists. It's called China. China has the world's largest digital community with nearly 1 billion users. Yet almost none of the services that we use every day in the Western world are available in that country. So, does this mean Chinese don't chat, don't follow their heroes online, and don't buy online? Of course not. They simply use local alternatives. Want to drop a message to a friend? WeChat. Can't tweet? Well, just use Weibo. Want to buy online? Alibaba. Need a ride? Didi. So even if they can't use Google for their search, Chinese are still using the internet after all. Or are they? As they access the cyberspace, Chinese technically interact with the same interconnected network of computers used by Spanish and German citizens. But is it correct to call the Chinese version of the internet actually the internet? Is it still the internet if you cannot use your favorite search engine and read your favorite blog? Is it just China? What about other countries like, say, Russia? And is internet in the US really a place of freedom and neutrality? Well, let's find out. Before answering those questions, let's make a quick step back and talk about what the internet actually is. In addition to being a tremendous feat of engineering, the internet is arguably one of the greatest achievements in global cooperation. Why? Well, these colored lines on the map are the submarine cables through which 99% of transoceanic telecommunication traffic transits. Yes, we are talking real physical cables. Let's look at this one. It is called the CME 3. It runs from Germany to Western Australia and Japan for a total length of 39,000 kilometers. It is owned by a consortium of 92 investors and has 39 landing points in 33 different countries. Not bad, right? Thanks to infrastructure like this, it is possible for a message to travel from London to Sydney and back in a quarter of a second. Internet is available in virtually every country and it is used by more than 4.9 billion people. It is estimated that there are more than 1.8 billion websites on the internet and more than 3 million emails are sent every single second. It is so natural for us to consider the internet as a single entity on a global scale that we basically give it for granted that I can travel from Madrid to Naples and be able to chat on my smartphone with my friend in Tokyo as I sip my coffee in Piazza Dante. Whilst relying on millions of kilometers of cables, satellite links, hundreds of millions of servers and networking apparatuses, Internet's foundations are laid on common technical pillars such as IP and DNS. A number of groups and organizations like the Internet Engineering Task Force and the ICANN oversee the stability and the evolution of Internet's architecture by defining and maintaining interoperability protocols and standards. But none of these organizations are directly affiliated with governmental institutions. Some argue that the reason the internet grew so rapidly is to be found precisely in the fact that it is based on non-proprietary protocols like the ones I mentioned before, and precisely because it operates without a central governing authority. This favors interoperability and prevents single players from gaining dominant positions. According to its early adopters and advocates, the internet should in fact have no centralized government and no geographical or political boundaries. It should be a decentralized, self-regulated single entity at a global scale. Now, is the internet really delivering on those high expectations? Well, you guessed it, no. But how bad is the situation really? We mentioned China, but why can't Chinese people access Google or Wikipedia? Well, you might have heard of something called the Great Firewall of China. Put in simple terms, Chinese internet traffic is routed through a state-controlled network of nodes within China. Their traffic can be inspected, filtered, altered, redirected, or blocked altogether. So effectively, if you are in mainland China and the site or service you want to access is included in a blacklist, your request simply gets dropped. Some restrictions might be circumvented using VPN, so essentially tricking Chinese networking nodes into thinking traffic is originated from outside of China. But since 2015, Chinese government has been cracking down on VPN use by blocking their services and preventing citizens from downloading VPN clients. China is set to employ more than 2 million people to monitor information flow on the internet. These systems effectively render China's internet sort of an isolated island. This, on one side, favors domestic companies that without foreign competition are allowed to grow and develop in isolation. On the other, helps the government take control of what information gets accessed and shared. Google was eventually forced to shut down their operations in China. Apple and Microsoft were allowed to operate only because they complied with the regulation dictated by the authorities. But what happens in China does not stop to passive censorship. The tools they built can help the government drive public opinion and even reshape reality as they need. If you try and access content that is deemed sensitive from Chinese authorities, they can easily redirect your search to a forged content that would support the government's narrative and agenda. Okay, but this only happens in China, right? Right? North Korea, Russia, Turkmenistan, Iran, Turkey, Bahrain, among other countries, are known to censor internet content and impose restrictions on social media news outlets, VPNs, and so on. According to a survey from the Freedom House on the freedom of the net, out of 65 surveyed countries, only 15 were actually marked as having free internet. Now, to be fair, this survey only covered 65 countries, and you might argue that since the institution that produced this report gets most of its funding from US government, that might be a little biased, and that's definitely possible. But still, knowing 67 of the countries were classified as either not free or partially free is really not comforting. Also, if you think that the US is leading the list of free countries, you are wrong, since the United States has experienced 4 consecutive years of decline when it comes to internet freedom. Plus, if we turn our attention to online discourse, the US has issues of its own. US companies and institutions fail pretty badly when it comes to responding to the spread of manipulated, misleading information. It is relatively uncommon, in fact, that malicious use of internet communication is persecuted with the right efficacy, while at the same time there is a fierce ongoing debate over where the freedom of speech ends and censorship begins. And to be frank, these issues are pretty common in many Western countries. So internet has its issues and flaws. It's surely far from being perfect, that's for sure. The Cambridge Analytica scandal in 2016 and most recently the Capitol Hill assault are 2 clear examples of how social media can be exploited for nefarious purpose. Some argue that the flaws afflicting the internet stems from its decentralized and self-governing nature. The criticism is that since the internet is owned by everyone and no one, there is no one to be held accountable, hence no one will be incentivized to solve its issues. But worry not, there is one company that claims to know how to solve this problem of accountability. No. That's not Google, nor Facebook, nor Microsoft, nor Amazon. This company is Huawei. Yes, that Huawei, the Chinese company whose CFO got arrested in Canada, who got banned in the US, one of the largest sellers of 5G technology. Yes, that Huawei. How does Huawei want to solve the accountability issue? Simple. Put the power back in the hands of nation states. They're quite serious with their effort So serious that in 2019 they pitched their idea in front of the delegates from 40 countries who gathered in Geneva at the International Telecommunication Union, a UN agency that establishes global technology standards. Huawei calls their idea new IP. They suggest an alternative architecture to the one that laid the foundations of the Internet since its inception 40 years ago. The official motivation behind their proposal is that the original architecture of the Internet, designed in the late 70s, is old and no longer capable of delivering on the expectations of the rapidly evolving digital world. They say it is insecure, unreliable, and insufficient. But some argue that on top of the features that should address those issues, new IP also includes tools that would facilitate user monitoring, user data collection, and sharing between governments. Some see this attempt to impose a top-down approach to the Internet as a way to grant national authorities finer-grained control over who accesses the Internet and how. These tools would allow Internet service providers to monitor single connected devices and give them the ability to cut access on an individual basis if desired. As you can imagine, apart from China itself, quite a few countries might be interested in such kind of tools. Don't think at the usual Iran, Saudi Arabia or Russia. Unsurprisingly, also US and European national governments are interested in ways to put more regulatory power in their hands. After all these scandals, many experts in Western countries think that the Internet deserves a more attentive regulatory oversight. New IP promoters suggest that any country should be free to adopt this alternative architecture if they want. Critics say that this is yet another attempt from China to exercise their soft power, and this attempt will most probably be successful, especially in places like Africa, where the Chinese companies provide most of the networking infrastructure. As described in a brilliant article from the Financial Times that I'll link below under the like button, if countries will start adopting new IP and enforce their own rules, users would not more be connecting to a unified global network, but rather to a patchwork of state-owned national internets, each one with their own restrictions and regulations. It would not be the Internet anymore, but a set of isolated islands with the obvious consequences on network interoperability. Someone could argue that this would essentially mean the end of the Internet as we know it. Okay, now the question is, should we avoid it, and if yes, how? First off, I don't know you, but I definitely don't want to end up in a world in which what can and cannot be done on the Internet gets arbitrarily decided by a centralized authority with their own agenda. But at the same time, I don't want to live in a fully deregulated world where my personal data becomes commodity to be traded between ruthless corporations. Yes, I'm looking at you, Meta. Now the real challenge is finding a third way, one that ensures democracy and transparency online, while at the same time avoids the trap of over-regulation and over-control. This is the daunting task we have ahead of us. How would you tackle this challenge? Any thoughts, ideas? Let's discuss in the comments below, because this one is not a simple one. That is all for now. I am Francesco Fusco and this is Decode. Thanks so much for watching. See you guys in the next one. Cheers.